because at the time, every state constitution had a Bill of Rights. So the argument was, we don't need a Bill of Rights because the state constitutions protect them. And I was like, all right, forget about the Bill of Rights. Well, what is this 130,000 stuff? And they make the rules stuff. That's no good. So James Madison wanted to be a senator. Richard Henry Lee ultimately wound up becoming a senator. And Patrick Henry made sure James Madison did not become a senator. So James Madison, who played an integral role at the convention in drafting the Constitution, in his own home state, was not supported and didn't become a senator. So then he had to run for the House of Representatives. And they ran a young fellow by the name of James Monroe, who was a war hero. You know who James Monroe is? He later went on to be president, but he's also famous at that time, more so in 1789, he was more famous for being a hero in the Revolutionary War, one of only 2 people that was actually wounded at the Battle of Trenton on Christmas Eve. So they're running a war hero against James Madison, this intellectual effete guy who went to Princeton, and they're basically saying, just like the campaigns really between Lonergan and Booker right now, yes, no, blah, blah, whatever. That campaign, yes, no, was about, well, the people want amendments, and James Monroe said, Madison's not going to make any amendments. He wrote the Constitution. He's not going to change his own thing. He won't admit he's wrong. So that was the issue in that campaign. And ultimately, Madison had to come forward and say, I absolutely will pass amendments. I will take the forefront, because the argument was, do we pass amendments by having the legislature propose them, or do we have a second national convention? And of course, the theory was the second national convention would be disastrous because nothing could ever get started. So they wanted, they being the Federalists, the friends of the Constitution, to avoid a second convention at all costs. So Madison won in a rather close election. It was like, I think it was 1,100 to 800 and change. He won the election, and he went to Congress. Now, when you make a campaign promise, the problem is you sometimes have to follow through. So, well, at the time they took that stuff seriously. So Madison has now sworn to everyone on his honor he's going to pass and bring forth amendments at a time when really, once the Constitution was ratified, no one was really chirping and barking for amendments to the same extent as the people were in Virginia, and they were really only doing it to defeat Madison. Now Madison made a promise, and he's got to keep up with it. Now Congress meets for the first time on March 4th, 1789 in New York, not in Philadelphia, not in Washington. And one of the first orders of business is they've got to figure out how they're going to proceed, how they're going to organize the government. Now Madison wants to avoid a second convention, and he's got to keep his campaign promise. And Madison, who was somewhat of a political maven even at that point, gets up and he tries to bring forward amendments. And of course he gets shot down and screamed down saying, we're too busy. What are you kidding me? We haven't even gotten off the ground. You want to amend this thing? We haven't even formed committees yet. We have no rules. But he's got to keep his promise. So ultimately, to cut to the chase, he proposes an amendment, and I think it was the second of the 24 or so amendments he originally proposed. And that would have guaranteed perpetual growth in the House of Representatives until it reached the size of 200. And that was essentially rejected. And they then sent the issue of amendments to a committee of the whole from the committee of the whole House of Representatives to a special committee of one representative from each state. Now, John Vining from Delaware was, of course, the member of Delaware because Delaware had one representative. Now, mind you, 95% right makes it 5% wrong. We thought, oh, all 13 states were there. That's not the truth. The first federal Congress was 11 states because North Carolina had not ratified the Constitution and joined the Union yet. Reason being, they said, we're not joining until there's a guarantee of amendments. Rhode Island didn't join for other reasons. Their attitude was, you can't start this new government because the Articles of Confederation requires all 13 of us to agree, and your new Constitution said you only have to have 9 people agree, 9 states agree. And of course, Rhode Island, which is this big, with a population this big, was essentially ignored. And after the government was going on, by 1790, when they were basically taking a position, and Alexander Hamilton was putting pressure on saying, okay, you're not going to join us, you're a foreign nation, so when your cows are sold to people in Connecticut, we're going to charge you an import tax. What? Don't kid yourself. This is the truth. Vermont came kicking and screaming, but they came. And it didn't occur until May of 1790. But that's how it happened. But, we don't talk about that stuff. It's like slavery because it makes us uncomfortable. It's like, oh, everyone wasn't all warm and fuzzy. And during the ratification debates, You know, we talk about the Federalist Papers with such veneration. Like I said, I've held lots of old books, holding George Washington's books. That was a little different. Okay. But, you know, I have a picture. You know, this is my copy of the Federalist Papers. I bought it at Barnes & Noble on clearance for $8.95. Says the same thing. Says the same thing with the forward from some people from Harvard University in 1950. But everyone today thinks, oh, this is only the only part of the debate. No, no, no. The anti-federalists published loads of paperwork. And, you know, I didn't bring those volumes because they're too big. But here's just some of the significant stuff written by the people who I talked about that refused to sign the convention. I'm not going to pass this around because it'll muddy what I'm trying to explain. So, the committee meets. John Vining from Delaware is the chairman, whether happenstance or whatever, and one representative from each state is on the committee. Of course, Madison is Virginia's representative on the committee. They're forming the government during the summer of 1789, and as they approach August, they decide that they want to have certain amendments. So they have 18 proposals that they come up with, coming out of the committee. And then they send it to the committee of the whole to debate. And that has the original version that said, oh, we're going to guarantee perpetual growth until there's 200. Now, mind you, it was a ceiling of 200 in the context of, at the time, 11 states expecting Rhode Island and North Carolina to eventually join, and what we today refer to as the Ohio River Valley. So the country's borders were essentially defined at that point, geographically. Now, they expected that the population would increase, but no one was planning for Louisiana Purchase. That's when everything changed. So in any event, back to 1789. So they were fighting over the summer, and like I said, I love how we look at these old-time political debates and arguments, you know, like they were all friends and stuff. The stuff today is soft and anemic. They were violent. They had duels. They hit each other. You know, that's what happened in the House of Representatives. The Senate, which was called the upper house because they met upstairs, not because they were superior, theoretically a co-equal branch. They're still today called the upper house, but it's because they met upstairs. You know, they didn't have the same problems. But of course, the whole point was the House of Representatives was supposed to be the people's house. You know, today, if you want to talk to your representative, now I use this example. The average ratio proportion today is one representative for every 750,000 people. The census in 2010 was slightly around, I think it was 320 million people nationwide. When you do that on the aggregate, since each state's guaranteed one, Wyoming only has like 630 people. So they have the smallest proportion. Montana has a ratio of one representative for every 1.3 million people. My point being, if you've ever been to see a football game, watch the Eagles, or if you're from North Jersey, where I'm from, the Giants. For example, Giant Stadium fits about 70,000 people. Okay, do that by 10, and a few more, and that's how many each representative represents. Now, the concept originally was so you could call your representative, and they could essentially be your lobbyist in Washington, or not what, but with the national government. Now, can you get a phone call returned by your local representative? Now, let me turn around. You guys are Tea Party people. You're in Mr. Runyon's district. You probably might.
No.
Okay, well.
We were just there.
Okay. I'm not trying to pour salt on it. I'm just trying to make my point. It's like, you people are politically active. You're the type of people he should be sucking up to. So if you're someone that just has a problem with your Social Security, with your veterans disability pension or something like that, how are you supposed to get it resolved? The idea was you would call your congressman and they would fix it for you. You remember the House of Representatives. But again, it's attributed largely to a never had a pot big enough story. And today, exactly, if you want to talk to your congressman, you can pay $500 and go to a fundraiser. Or if they do something for you, the first thing they're going to send you is a letter for a campaign donation. And, or you can hire a lobbyist. Now, part of this got me thinking, because I was doing some work about the apportionment, and I'll tell you, I don't want to go off on a tangent here because I want to stick on the message because I want to get through this whole thing to get to the real meat. And I was speaking to a gentleman who founded a college down in Northern Virginia called Patrick Henry College. And he was working on apportionment issues in Montana. And he essentially formed a college for people to go to homeschool. Okay. Now, the funny thing is, you always got to be careful who you're talking to, because I'm known as a historian, a constitutional scholar, and a civil rights lawyer. I also happen to be a devout Christian, things like that. And so I was talking to them, and in their neck of the woods, so to speak, in their part of Virginia, they have about 80,000 people that live and subscribe to their very, very conservative views. Many people think you're conservative. No. And I don't mean that in a bad way. The whole point is you can live however you want. It's the freedom concept. But the point is, when I spoke about this with someone else and about how they were fighting for representation, how they felt it was unfair, they said, well, oh, those crazy Christians. I just listened and I said, okay, now I'm thinking like, I also happen to be a crazy Christian. Not maybe as conservative as them, but okay. And I started thinking like, well, why with 80,000 people, when did 80,000 stop being a big number? Why should, whether you agree with them or not, why shouldn't they have their own seat at the table?